may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, so if you've been playing fantasy football for a while now, I mean, they say this more so in Dynasty Fantasy Football, at least they did way back in the day, but we're going to be focusing on redraft here. Let's not talk too much about Dynasty. Well, you always heard, hey, year 3 is the year of the breakout wide receiver. Year 3, year 3, year 3. Where if you actually dive into it, if you actually look at win rates across fantasy leagues and where you see those breakouts coming from, it's actually year 2. You see those sophomore players taking that next leap in fantasy football, specifically at the wide receiver position, because we know you get the majority of those running back breakouts happening as early as their rookie season. But no, at wide receiver, it happens in year 2 when you can identify the wide receiver that's going to take that leap after the rookie season. Generally, that's a league-winning type player. I mean, we go back to that 2019 NFL draft class. You have DK Metcalf, A.J. Brown, Terry McLaurin. You go to that 2018 class, DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, and DJ Chark. I mean, that class is a perfect example, and none of those players were highly productive their rookie seasons. But going into year 2, they were being drafted highly in fantasy because people were a little bit excited, except in the case of DJ Chark. We know Chark was way under the radar, but then they came out and completely smashed, and all of a sudden, they each turned into league winners based on where they were drafted. And in 2017, you had Juju taking that next step to completely smash alongside Antonio Brown. You had Godwin, you had Kenny Golladay. I mean, so many of those players broke out in year 2. But now let's try to go through, let's try to look at this past year's NFL draft class in the 2020 class and try to talk about some wide receivers that could be on the verge of breaking out, and if we think you should be targeting them in fantasy drafts based on their current price. But like I said, guys, this is not a Dynasty video. We talk Dynasty Fantasy Football every day on our other channel, but no, this one we're going to be specifically talking 2021 production, which is extremely important regardless of whatever format you are playing in. But more importantly, this is going to be a redraft video focusing in on that. But of course, before we get into it, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and we are just continuing to be the fastest growing fantasy football channel on YouTube, and it's because of the support y'all are showing not only over there on Patreon, but by leaving comments, leaving likes. I mean, yesterday's video passed 300 likes within the first 5 hours. That's wild. So let's get into this one. Let's talk Jerry Jeudy, the number 1 wide receiver out of this list that most people are going to have on their boards. Now, Jerry Jeudy coming into the NFL draft, I mean, he was a near perfect prospect coming out of Alabama. You look across every single box you want to see. I mean, he had decent size. He was 6'1", 193 pounds. He was only 21 years old coming into the NFL, which we know correlates to having that long-term fantasy success. And I understand a lot of people don't know that by now, but please just do some research. You'll see that age coming into the NFL draft is highly predictive if you combine it with NFL draft capital in trying to identify these breakouts. So he checks that box. He was also selected in the middle of the first round by the Denver Broncos with that 15th overall selection. He ran a 4.45 40-yard dash, which meets the minimum threshold that you're looking to see. And currently, he is being drafted in the 8th round of redraft leagues. Now, to look at Jerry Jeudy, I don't necessarily want to just look at what he did his rookie season, because at that point, you're not necessarily getting a full picture. I mean, this is a guy that's only 22 years old. I think we have to kind of take a step back. We have to remember how good of a prospect he was. And by doing so, we have to look at Alabama and the production profile that he had. Now, I know a lot of people like to use their own little algorithms to come up with an overall production matrix for what they saw with a college wide receiver in terms of the target market share, in terms of what he accounted for with their yards, receptions, touchdowns, targets. More so, I just want to focus in on yards, because we know that touchdowns are going to be so noisy and so volatile year to year that they're going to come one year, go the next, and it's going to be very hard to predict exactly what you're expecting there outside of a player like a Devontae Adams. So I like to really just focus in on the yards, because those are the number one thing that are going to be correlated from season to season. And here, Jerry Jeudy, in his sophomore season at Alabama, was able to average 87.6 receiving yards a game. Now, if you go through and you look at what the Alabama offense averaged in passing yards, they averaged 342 passing yards, which is very important in us going and looking at the percentage of his overall passing offense that he accounted for at Alabama. And here he accounted for slightly more than 25% of the passing offense at Alabama, which does not meet our minimum threshold, but I'm going to point out a few things here. The first thing is he was only in his true sophomore season when he did this, so you can give him a little bit of a pass in that. And also, I mean, you are just never looking at a situation like this across any other team in college football. I mean, it's going to be very hard to look at historical thresholds that we established over there on our rookie draft guide based on that research and try to apply it to this situation, which is why we have that rookie draft guide, which we call metrics with context, because the last thing you can do is just look at numbers on a piece of paper and base everything off of that. You have to go through and do a little bit of more research into it to understand the situation where those numbers were produced. And here in 2018, I mean, Jerry Jeudy did this with a roster that had Jalen Waddle, Henry Ruggs, Irv Smith Jr., and Devonta Smith. So 4 quality players, all for their respective NFL offenses. Jerry Jeudy led this team in production as a true sophomore player, and he was able to account for over 1/4 of the Alabama passing offense while doing so. So that's an incredible mark for Jerry Jeudy. I understand that we established a 29% market share over there for those prospects coming into the NFL draft that you wanted to see with their college profiles. But that's why it is the rookie draft guide metrics with context and not just rookie draft guide metrics, end of story. No, you have to understand that. You have to see that he had a very similar type production in 2019 in his true junior season. And look at the team that was led with Devonta Smith finally breaking out, also having Henry Ruggs, Jalen Waddle, and Irv Smith all on that same roster, all a year older. So Jerry Jeudy, incredibly impressive prospect. I mean, someone that essentially checks every single box. He broke out at a good age. He also had a great receiving profile if you look at the context of it. But his rookie season was very bad. I am tired of people trying to come out here and talk about Jerry Jeudy as if he was an impressive rookie. He simply wasn't. I know that I lost a lot of money playing DFS tournaments and just throwing in Jerry Jeudy, hoping that we were going to capture just some random spike week. So I know that I'm probably a little bit burnt here. But if you go through and look at how bad this season was, I mean, it's almost inexcusable. Where his rookie season, he averaged 8.7 points per game, which was good to make him the wide receiver 73 in points per game. So someone that was not even rosterable in a redraft format. Now, I know that he played one game with Kendall Hinton in there as his starting quarterback. If you don't remember that, it was the COVID game. They had a starting wide receiver in there at quarterback. So you essentially take that game out completely because they only had like 20 passing yards in that entire game. And there you see him bump up to a 9.33 points per game mark as the wide receiver 67 in points per game. So still a wide receiver 6 during his rookie season. And you all know we always go through, we look at before the bye, we look at after the bye to see if a player is trending in the correct direction. Well, Jerry Jeudy pretty much was stagnant the entire season. I mean, it's about the same the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, and the end of the year. So here we can't even do so. And why I think this is such a bad rookie season for Jerry Jeudy is because he had all the opportunity in the world. I mean, you go through and he accounted for 113 targets in this offense, 52 receptions, and 156 total yards. So that was through 16 games. And if you look at the per game percentages based on each category in this offense, Jerry Jeudy accounted for slightly more than 20% of his team's targets in 2020. Now, he accounted for only 16% of their receptions. So he had a very bad time actually converting those targets over to receptions. Now, while he did have a reception, usually it was highly efficient because you see the yardage and he accounted for 24.8% of the overall team yardage. So Jerry Jeudy was efficient when he caught the ball. But the problem was Jerry Jeudy actually bringing the ball in even though the volume was there. And I know a lot of people are going to be saying, but Mason, this was one of the worst quarterback situations in the entire NFL. And I agree with you. I would argue that this was the worst quarterback situation in the entire NFL. But the problem is it hasn't changed. The problem is the only difference is you have Teddy Bridgewater coming over. They give a 6th-round pick for him. They don't have to pay any of his contract. So it's not like Teddy Bridgewater is some quarterback that the NFL evaluators think is going to be really an upgrade at all over Drew Lock. Maybe he's a slight upgrade. Maybe you can get a little bit excited, but it's not going to be anything massive. And you go through and you look at this team and the overall target situation, where in 2020, the team leaders in targets were Jerry Jeudy at 1, Noah Fant at 2, Tim Patrick at 3, KJ Hamler, Melvin Gordon, and Deshaun Hamilton. So you're looking at Jerry Jeudy and you're going, hey man, you were only competing for targets really with Noah Fant and KJ Hamler. There are really no other players on this offense that were talented in the slightest. How are you going to let a player like Tim Patrick account for 80 targets through the course of the season? Now you go through and you see, hey, this team is now getting back Courtland Sutton. Courtland Sutton is going to be good to go by training camp. So there's really no concern at all that Courtland Sutton's going to miss time this upcoming season. And you could make the argument that Sutton may be the wide receiver 1 in Denver. So all of a sudden, Jerry Jeudy, who got 20% of the team targets last year and finished as a wide receiver 7, is now going to be seeing less opportunity. You add Javonte Williams into the mix as well. So possibly this team decides to skew a little bit more run heavy. And you're looking at a situation where I know Jerry Jeudy is a very talented wide receiver. Nobody is going to be escaping that. But the fact is, this is the worst situation in the entire NFL for a wide receiver to succeed. It's a very crowded wide receiver room with Courtland Sutton, with KJ Hamler, with Noah Fant, pretty much just being a big-bodied wide receiver, pretty much just being Kyle Pitts light. So Jerry Jeudy, I don't think that he's a candidate to break out in his second year. Because if he's a candidate to break out in his second year, what has to happen? Does Teddy Bridgewater have to become all of a sudden a top 10 quarterback in the NFL? Is he going to all of a sudden support Jerry Jeudy, Courtland Sutton, and Noah Fant? I'm not buying that. I'm looking at this as a situation that's even worse than last year. So yeah, maybe Jerry Jeudy takes a step up in his development. Maybe he takes a step up in his talent. But if the targets go down and he was a wide receiver 7 to begin with, how much higher can the efficiency go for him to be a top 15 guy? I'm not buying it. Jerry Jeudy, someone I am not going to be targeting in redraft leagues this upcoming year. Yeah, maybe in Dynasty, where you can see this Denver situation getting a lot better for the quarterback, just say in 2022, and Courtland Sutton is an upcoming free agent, then yeah, sure, maybe you like Jerry Jeudy there. But in a redraft league, I'm almost all out on him. Now, let's go over to a wide receiver going a little bit later. Let's go to Laviska Shenault, who has an ADP hovering around 100, so most of the time he's going in about the 10th round of redraft leagues currently. Laviska, also someone that had a great wide receiver prospect profile coming into last year's NFL draft. I mean, he had the age box checked. He was even a better wide receiver in terms of his size, 6'1", 227 pounds. I mean, this is a monstrous man. And I know a lot of people are going to be pulling up his 40-yard dash and going, Mason, that's gross. But guys, literally his 40-yard dash number does not mean a single thing. He was injured while he ran it. If you looked at Laviska Shenault at Colorado, I mean, this was a player that was an absurd athlete. People were comparing him to Julio Jones with his athleticism. You don't have to worry about his speed at all. He's someone that is burning fast. Now, he goes at the beginning of the second to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I'm not going to lie, I was a little bit worried about Laviska Shenault before the NFL draft because we were looking at the Jaguars situation going, hey, we don't have any allegiance to any of these players with the front office or Urban Meyer. What happens if they decide to take a Rashad Bateman at the end of the first round? What happens if they decide to go through and take a player like Kenneth Gainwell in the third? We thought that James Robinson, DJ Chark, and Laviska Shenault were all a little risky. Well, looks like James Robinson gets the bullet, but Laviska Shenault, DJ Chark, they're completely safe. They completely dodge any other wide receiver talent coming in. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be saying, but Mason, Marvin Jones is coming. Or sound the alarms. Who the hell cares? It's Marvin Jones. Are you kidding me? So essentially, this team adds Marvin Jones, Trevor Lawrence, and Travis Etienne. But the addition of Trevor Lawrence vastly outweighs the addition of Marvin Jones. I mean, I'm happy they decided to add Marvin Jones through free agency rather than going through and deciding to draft someone in the NFL draft. Now, if you go through, I mean, yeah, Laviska Shenault wasn't highly productive his rookie season. Nobody's going to be escaping that. I mean, here he was the wide receiver 57 in points per game. He averaged 10.192 points per game. But he did leave one game early due to injury. So if you take out that game here, he was actually the wide receiver 50 on a points per game basis. So a low-end wide receiver 4, high-end wide receiver 5, still someone you can't start at all. But hey, he was more productive than Jerry Jeudy. And all of a sudden, his situation has gotten significantly better because you're looking at the target leaders from last year. Laviska Shenault led this team, by the way. Then you had Keelan Cole. Then you had DJ Chark. Then you had James Robinson, Chris Conley, Tyler Eifert, and James O'Shaughnessy. But all of a sudden, hey, even though they decided to add Marvin Jones, well, Keelan Cole, someone who had 55 receptions last year, is now gone. So he's gone. Chris Conley's gone. He had 40. You had Tyler Eifert. Now he's gone. He had 36. So even with Marvin Jones coming in, he's not going to be soaking up that much volume. Obviously, Marvin Jones isn't going to be accounting for all of those targets. And naturally, you assume that there are going to be way more targets to go around, given the fact that Trevor Lawrence is going to be a vastly superior option over Mike Glennon and Gardner Minshew. So this team is going to have longer sustained drives. This team is going to be more efficient in general with Trevor Lawrence at quarterback. And all of a sudden, there are more targets available in this offense. So it's a completely different situation than what you're finding with Jerry Jeudy, where the situation in Jacksonville has gotten significantly better. There are more targets available. There is a massive upgrade at quarterback. For those reasons, I am pretty much all in on this price of Laviska Shenault. I mean, you go back to last year, this is someone that averaged 5.6 targets a game, which only accounted for a little under 15% of the offense. He averaged 4.14 receiving yards a game, which accounted for 17%. So already you're seeing that he's converting those targets into receptions at a much higher clip than his teammates. Then all of a sudden, you also go over to his yardage, and he is smashing in terms of the efficiency you're expecting on a yards per target basis. So we see that he pretty much has the talent, and he was in a very bad situation last year, but the situation is significantly better. So I don't understand the ADP difference. How are you seeing Laviska Shenault go 2 rounds after Jerry Jeudy in redraft leagues? Are we that confident that Jerry Jeudy is that much of a better prospect that he's going to all of a sudden be more productive than a wide receiver who outproduced him last year, even though that wide receiver got a massive upgrade in his own situation, and Jerry Jeudy probably got worse with Courtland Sutton coming in? So yeah, no, fade Jeudy, target Shenault. I mean, it's an easy answer in my opinion. Now, our next guy we are going to be talking about is going to be Michael Pittman Jr. We'll round it out with him. He's going right after Laviska Shenault in drafts. He has like an ADP at 102. And Michael Pittman Jr., I know he went a little bit higher than Laviska Shenault in the NFL draft, but in my opinion, he wasn't as good of a prospect. I mean, he's already 23 years old, which I know people are going to laugh at, say, Mason, how does that matter? But please look at historical hit rates. It definitely matters. When you see those players come in after spending all 4 years in college, they essentially need to hit their rookie seasons. If they're not hitting their rookie seasons, I mean, why is it taking them so long to quote unquote break out? But here with Michael Pittman, he doesn't have the age. He was drafted with the second pick in the second round, though, which you like to see. You also like to see that he was 6'4", 223 pounds. So this is a monstrous human, someone that should be a red zone weapon, someone that you should actually be able to project to have a higher touchdown rate compared to his teammates. Now you go through, I mean, his season last year was pretty poor. Not going to lie. I mean, here in 2020, 7.8 points per game, wide receiver 84. But unlike the other 2 wide receivers, he actually did improve as the season went on. You split it halfway through with before the bye week and after the bye week. I believe his bye was in week 7. And here after the bye week, he does bump up to 8.6 points per game, which was good for making him the wide receiver 69 on a per game basis. Still someone that wasn't even rosterable in redraft formats, but at the very minimum, I mean, at least you're seeing him take that progression, even if it is a small step. Now you go through, look at what he did for this team's overall production. He accounted for 4.7 targets a game, which was good for 13.6 of the passing offense, 3.1 receptions, which was good for a similar mark, and 38.7 receiving yards a game, which is slightly higher than the other 2, but pretty much all in the same range. I mean, he's someone that was not a massive difference maker for this Indianapolis Colts team, and very similar to a Jerry Jeudy. I don't see how this situation is getting much better. Because we go through this entire roster, we look at the leaders in receptions. You have Hines at 1, you have T.Y. Hilton at 2, you have Zach Pascal at 3, Michael Pittman at 4, Jonathan Taylor at 5, Mo Alley Cox at 6. And unlike what you're seeing with Laviska Shenault, where in the Jacksonville Jaguars offense, you had a lot of those guys leaving. Here in Indianapolis, you don't have a single one gone. I mean, they're all coming back, and you're also adding a wide receiver that I actually like a little bit more if you're looking at him as a prospect, still the same age, Paris Campbell. Paris Campbell coming back into this offense after suffering the knee injury, after looking very impressive at the beginning of last season. So where are the targets going to be coming from with Michael Pittman Jr.? Is the projection of him going this high in drafts just assuming that he's going to turn into a vastly superior wide receiver than what he was last year? Are we just going to be assuming that T.Y. Hilton falls off the face of the earth, even though he was already a pretty bad wide receiver outside of a 4-week stretch last year? Now, Paris Campbell coming back in. I'm assuming Paris Campbell's the guy taking those T.Y. Hilton targets. So I don't see it with Michael Pittman Jr. Maybe you think Carson Wentz is all of a sudden going to be some quote-unquote massive upgrade at quarterback. I don't buy it based on what we saw with Carson Wentz pretty much every season outside of 1 year in Philadelphia. So yeah, here I think we recap this video. I know we're going to get a lot of hate for this because people don't like hearing bad things about players, but I'm fading Jerry Jeudy in the 8th round. I'm fading Michael Pittman Jr. in the 10th, and I am drafting the hell out of Laviska Shenault in the 10th round. I mean, Laviska is the most exciting player on this list, in my opinion, for his 2021 situation. Like I said, in Dynasty, sure, go all in on Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Jeudy is a very talented guy, but the situation is piss poor. I mean, the only thing that saves Jerry Jeudy this upcoming season is if this team somehow trades for Aaron Rodgers. But it hasn't happened so far, and if it was going to happen, I'd assume that it would have been just, say, a week ago. So, yeah, I think that Laviska Shenault in the 10th, I'm drafting him over Jerry Jeudy straight up, probably to be honest, and you're getting multiple rounds of a discount. Take Laviska, fade the other two. But yeah, thank you guys. I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. I really hope y'all got something from it. Of course, go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. It helps us out a ton, and I'll see y'all with the video tomorrow. I want to thank everybody who has recently decided to join the flock in Alex, Jack, Bud, Kevin, Connor, Caesar, Jonathan, Joseph, Jordan, and James. Thank you, my dudes.